It's the announcement wrestling fans expected but did not want to hear. Bret Hart wanted to address you, his fans, on Off the Record to make this announcement.
I'm forever done with wrestling. I'm officially, it's impossible for me to ever go back. And even if I wanted to go back, I couldn't go back.
Off the Record with Michael Landsburg is brought to you by the Keg Steakhouse and Bar. For great steaks, good friends, see you tonight.
We got a call from Bret Hart's people saying that he wanted to come on this show and get a few things off his chest. Thankfully for us, Bret often has chosen us to get things off his chest. He was the first guy ever to do it on this show, and this will be the last time that he does it on this set, at least as a pro wrestler. Bret, thanks very much for joining us on this show, but for all of your appearances, I thank you in particular because you helped make this show a hit. Bret, first of all, let's hear it from you.
This is it. I wanted to come on this show, and I don't really have a platform anymore. WCW didn't invite me back or give me the opportunity to at least say goodbye to my fans or anything like that. So I started running out of options, unless I
want to hear the words from your mouth, though. Let's hear it.
Yeah, I'm forever done with wrestling. I'm officially, it's impossible for me to ever go back. And even if I wanted to go back, I couldn't go back. The concussion that I got from Bill Goldberg, which I don't blame Bill for, but what he did to me was a pretty costly mistake on his part, and nobody took care of me for that. But yeah, it's over. I can't go back. There's no chance I can go back. The only way I could go back is to really risk serious injury and end up like when I see Joe Frazier on TV, I go, yeah, I could go back for a couple more years, but I just don't want to be remembered like that either.
So what have doctors told you? Because I think we should mention it was 10 months ago, roughly, that you suffered a concussion and you have felt the effects. You were on the show and you're telling me that it was a struggle just to sit in that chair and talk cohesively and coherently.
It was so hard for me when I did this show last time where I answered all those questions about my brother and Vince McMahon. And when I got home, I actually digressed and went back like 2 weeks where I couldn't finish a sentence again. And it was such a drain on my brain. And now I'm about 90%, which is pretty good. Like people talk to me and people have talked to me for a long time, and they always assume you're okay now. But I can tell as I get better every week. It's like a layer comes off and another layer comes off until I can tell I've improved so much from the last time I was on this show. I'll actually be able to remember it, and I won't go home kind of,
So I want to talk to you about your exit from the WCW. Your entrance to the WCW was much trumpeted, and there was a huge story, which you told on this show after the Survivor Series and the way things unraveled there. But I want to ask you about, as you leave the WCW, how were you told, and if you could have written the script, as it stands right now, with the concussion, what should they have done?
Well, I think first of all, they should at least just talk to me and said, look,
and they didn't talk to you?
No, they never called me. They never spoke to me. They sent me a letter in the mail saying you're released, which I thought was, there's sort of, I look at it from two sides. They could have fired me a long time ago, which wouldn't have been right either. But they had that option, whereas I couldn't have done much about it. I think they hung on, hoping that maybe I could come back. They never waited for that answer. I believe the answer would have been no. Every conversation I've had with my doctors has been, we strongly recommend that you don't ever go back to wrestling. But we never got to the final, like I had all these tests done in June, and then they take those tests, and then I had a bunch of tests done at the end of September. They match the tests up together, and they can tell how much I've improved and how much I haven't. I don't have the results even now back from those, and that would have been the final answer, and I'd probably know within another week or two.
One of the things that you've been critical of the WWF in particular were the angles that they were taking. It must bother you that they used your injury and, in fact, the end of your career in the WCW as an angle.
Yeah, it really bothered me. And again, when you're dealing with a concussion, it's so hard to have that kind of judgment that you normally have. And I'm not trying to make excuses, but when I got there, they sort of lay it out for you, and you all the time you feel this, I'm trying to contribute. I'm trying to do something for the company. And so they come out with a storyline, and it's all based on my concussion. And I should have had the sense to go, I'm not doing that. But I was walking on such thin ice that I tried to, you know, do what they wanted. And it wasn't really till I got back, because I know they might say, oh, he's sure two-faced, he did it with no problem. But the truth is, when I got back home and I watched it, I felt like such a prostitute to take such a serious injury and such a damaging thing for me, and how they really didn't show a lot of consideration for me. They cut my pay in half, and they've done very little for me ever since I got hurt, considering the fact that I was their world champion, and I had done everything they'd ever asked. And I just felt that when I saw that back, I thought I looked like such a prostitute, and I said so in my column.
Even though you were their world champion, things, I think it's fair to say, did not work out in the WCW the way you had hoped and the way a lot of Canadian fans expected that it would happen. How much of a factor was Hulk Hogan or Hollywood Hogan or any Hogan you want to call him, his presence in the WCW, limiting where anybody else could go?
You know, I don't know the answer. I mean, there's a lot of wrestlers that'll blame Hulk Hogan for everything, and I don't know that they're wrong. I don't know who I've always felt like I was a train with no one in charge, no one in the front of the train running it. It was always just going around and around. No one seemed to know what we were doing. I never had any idea. I can remember even when my brother Owen had got killed and I had come back, and I was being built into a storyline, and they were going to do all these things for me. I talked to Eric Bischoff, and don't worry, and they flew me down. I even got to the building early, and they had all these big plans. Well, I was walking out to the ring to do an interview, and I'm walking out and going, I still don't know what I'm saying. And this is maybe the most, for me, significant moment, and the hardest sort of pressured moment for me to ever be in, and I don't know what I'm saying. I remember I went out and I did the interview, and I came back, and Eric Bischoff said, he was like almost mad. He goes, you came across as a heel or something like that. I felt like saying, you give me some kind of a clue what I'm supposed to do, and I'll do it, but don't tell me 30 seconds before I walk out the curtain, and then when I come back, tell me that I didn't do it right, because you guys don't have a clue what you're doing around here, and they never did. The WCW, they never had a clue from the time I got there to the time I left about anything. I think it's a business that has been run by guys that don't understand wrestling. There's no wrestlers that run it.
Okay, I have to ask you, when you went to the WCW, you must have had an impression of who your friends and who your enemies were in World Championship Wrestling. 3 years later, now that you've left, how correct were you? Who are your friends and who were your enemies?
Well,
who was good to you? Who treated you like the man that you treat other people like?
Well, Eric Bischoff treated me good on certain levels. Like,
see, there's a difference
between
nice. Competency, which is maybe you're questioning how good a job he did with the WCW, and integrity, which is a totally different thing. Who treated you well?
Well, Eric Bischoff treated me good, but he didn't do anything with me from a business
That's
standpoint.
a professional.
So
okay.
I always will say Eric Bischoff treated me very well.
Right.
Unfortunately, he didn't do anything with my career, which is important. But
absolutely, but there's a difference, though. You can say you're incompetent, but that's not the same as being a bad person.
Saying that, and then looking at everyone else, I don't know anyone else. Like, no one treated me badly. I don't really have the bad things to say about the WCW. They were always nice. They just were a company that didn't know what they were doing. They needed, you know what that WCW needed was, it needed a Vince McMahon, maybe an honest one. And they would have been they had great wrestlers, they had great talent, they had everything but someone that could put it together.
Well put, and I respect that, given the fact that I know you don't like Vince and that you have a lot of real issues with him, but to say that he could have made a difference over there, I think is impressive honesty. We've got to go to break. As we go to break, I'll give you a chance to follow up that. Maybe you want to take back the compliment. We'll talk to him about WCW and maybe what went wrong when we return with Bret Hart. He is Bret Hart, and he has been described by himself and many, many other wrestling fans as the best there is, the best there was, and the best there ever will be. He announced about 5 minutes ago on the show that he has retired for the last time. Whether he wanted to give it up right now is not a factor. You had to give it up. You were telling us that your pay was cut in half by World Championship Wrestling, that it was in your contract if you could not wrestle for health reasons. I want to ask you this. Does that not encourage someone like you or anybody else who has that stipulation in his contract to work hurt, to do whatever it takes to get back in the ring?
Well, I guess it was never. I always thought it was bad luck to do that kind of thing. I think a lot of wrestlers do take advantage of that. But for me, the people ask me about this all the time, like, you know, you signed the contract. And the truth of it is, I signed my contract with, like, maybe an hour and a half before midnight with Eric Bischoff, with lawyers on the phone. It was very pushed and rushed together. And it did come up. I did have an insurance policy through Lloyd's of London that was a stipulation. I was worried about getting hurt. I've always been worried about getting hurt. But I had to be permanently injured to benefit from that. And so that does help me. Like, I have that. But the problem I have with the contract was, which I brought up on the phone, was what happens if it's not a permanent injury? What if it's just what if I just separate my shoulder and I'll be back in 7 or 8 months? I don't get paid then, because it has nothing to do with collecting on a policy. And so people say, well, how could you sign that? And I remember that came up in the conversation, and Eric Bischoff said to me, he said, don't ever worry about that, because if you get hurt in the ring, this company will pay guys. As long as you don't get hurt skateboarding or something, horseback riding, if you get hurt in the ring, we will pay you in full. And he named Lex Luger, he named 6 or 7 wrestlers. He said every one of them has been paid in full. And I suppose I made the mistake of going, he named so many guys that I took that as a sign of good faith. Well, when I did get hurt, and maybe I could have gone back, there's been no way of knowing. It turns out now it is a permanent disability, and I will benefit somehow. But the truth is, I was really under the gun there that they could make me go back.
So the same promise may have been made to Bill Goldberg, and they followed through on that. Bill Goldberg did get paid while he was hurt. Does that bother you?
Yeah, well, it bothers me because the principle in the business, the wrestling profession, and I think even Vince McMahon maybe would, well, maybe not. I was to say, if you got hurt in the ring, especially by somebody, I think there's an obligation by the promoter to respect that and say, you know, this guy gave his all. And there's some situations where you wonder, but in my case, it was a clear-cut example of being hurt by a guy in the ring. I gave 100%. I gave everything I could to this company. I was a hard-working, steady, loyal. I trumpeted WCW everywhere I went and all the time, and I just thought it was a crappy thing to do. And you know, I don't want anyone to. I don't want people to feel sorry for me or think that I have all these bad memories of wrestling. I'm really proud of everything I did in wrestling. I'm one of the lucky ones. I've saved my money. I'm gonna do fine. I'm gonna have a really happy life. I really have great memories from wrestling. But the sad thing about wrestling is that I'm one of the exceptions to the rule. There's so many wrestlers that don't and won't have what I got, and maybe that's something people should consider.
I want to talk to you about some of the high points of your career. I mean, low points have been well documented, and probably leaving the way you had to leave has to qualify as one of them. But we'll talk about some of the great moments, and there have been so many, for this man, Bret Hart, when we return to Off the Record. Starting to sweat, aren't you, Hart? You're starting to sweat, aren't you, Hart? I could tell, yeah. Bret Hart has retired, and it's interesting for me because in so many ways, your career over the last 3 years is tied into the history of this show. You were the first guest to put us on the map with a Survivor Series scandal. You were even on the 3rd show ever with Craig Northey from Odds. I would not normally do this kind of interviewing because it's kind of a little bit cliched, but I think our viewers really want the chance to hear your thoughts as to your career. Is there one thing that defines to you how you look back and see your career?
Well, I still believe I was the best. You know, I think, you know, people don't understand wrestling. They understand it from a certain aspect because they see it, but the really way to understand wrestling is to be in the ring and do it. And I know that I worked with so many different guys and created these incredible stories. And Vince McMahon didn't help me with my stories. He decided the outcomes of matches and things like that. But I weave together these stories and these moves and things. I had a great time with Jim Neidhart for the Hart Foundation. The 6 years we were tag partners. We never had an argument. We never had a fight. We had a great time the whole time we were a team. There's never been any animosity between us over my success and where he's gone, say, since. But we had some great matches. Killer Bees were a great team. The Bulldogs and the Hart Foundation, I think, were the best tag team matches ever in wrestling. And then moving on later, I think Kurt Hennig, Mr. Perfect. If I had to pick one wrestler to wrestle again, it would be him. Just because he was such a pleasure to wrestle with every night. And he was just so much fun. You knew every night when you knew you were wrestling him, it was going to be a pleasure to work with him. And he was one of the best. He really was. I loved wrestling him. Dynamite Kid, of course, was another great wrestler. I think maybe pound for pound was the greatest of all time. As far as my favorite matches, I always really loved the match I had with Steve Austin in WrestleMania. I think it was 13 or 12 or something like that. But it was just
number 13.
13. You know, Steve, I would never pretend that I made Steve Austin or anything like that, but I know that that match was the match that defined him as a character. And Steve had a lot of input in the match, but I know there was a part where he was a bloody pulp kind of thing, and I had my hold on him, and he pushed and pushed and pushed, and he kicked me out, and I fell over. And I can remember before we did that move, I was in the dressing room with him, and I remember, or I actually was out at ringside before the crowd was in, and I remember I described how I thought it should go, and I said, it's just like when Jack Nicholson was trying to pick up that big sink and throw, yeah, Jack Nicholson.
And one flew over the cuckoo's nest.
And he's trying to throw it through the window, and he's not able to do it. I said, it's the same thing when you try to kick out of that move and the sharpshooter, and I fall over, and then I come back up. I said, that'll make you as a hero. It'll be the heartbreak where they go, oh, like they can't, and it was. That was the moment, in my opinion, that launched him into that. He had their hearts and soul after that. Shawn Michaels, I think the hour match I had with Shawn Michaels.
That was in London, right?
No, that was in Anaheim, WrestleMania 12.
Yeah, I was going to say WrestleMania 12.
That, I think, was the greatest single clinic on professional wrestling that you could ever get. It was a contest, though. It wasn't. In wrestling, a great match is a great work where everyone works together. This was a match where they, for about 3 months, they burned me out and ran me. I went from India to Bahrain to everywhere you could think of. They really ground me into the dirt, and in the meanwhile, Shawn was off doing. He was just fanatically fit and in shape. And I think it was designed for him to run right over top of me for 60 minutes, and for me to be barely like so out of shape and like worn out.
And at the time, you didn't like Shawn Michaels. I know you don't like Shawn Michaels, right? But was there animosity at that time?
Well, that was the first signs of his head getting really big. I remember Shawn, you know, because it was, you know, I knew months before he was winning the title, and I never had a problem with that. But I can remember him telling me in the dressing room, just about 6 weeks before that match, about all the guys he was going to work with. And he was naming Hunter, and I'm going to wrestle Razor Ramon, I'm going to wrestle Diesel. He named all his friends. And I remember listening to that. This was in State College, Pennsylvania. And I remember that's the first sign I said, geez, he's only looking out for his friends. And that's wrong. You should never dictate who you're going to work with. And I knew then that he would be a problem. But just the way it was designed, they really tried to run me into the ground. And when I got to that match, I did just the opposite. I was in unbelievable shape, and I showed up, and it was a contest, a 60-minute contest to see who could outdo each other, and I think I held my own.
I think a lot of us would call that maybe greatest match of all times.
Wembley Stadium is one more.
See, I knew there was a Wembley there. Yeah, there, I threw it out there. All right, you hear that music, Brett? That's my cue. You took your cues, right? You were a good worker. I'm a good worker, too, and I got to go to break. But as I go to break, I say, let us know the things that you want to hear and from the guests. Brett, this is directed to you. Can you do me a favor and snap off one of Landsburg's legs and beat him into the ground with it? Don't hurt him, though, okay? Thanks, buddy.
I'll have to do it.
You do, because?
I think I put a sharpshooter on you one time.
You did, absolutely, and I'm well recovered. Brett, the true wrestling fans in Canada will never forget your dedication and enthusiasm for the squared circle. Thanks for the many thrills. That from Jeff M. in Toronto, but that could come from about 10 million wrestling fans across this country. There's our website, there's our email, there's our fax number. Back with more OTR in a moment. He's unquestionably the greatest wrestler this country has ever produced, and many would say he's the greatest wrestler of all times, but we now talk about your career, Bret Hart, in the past. What lies ahead for you?
Well, I'm going to try to, you know, spend a little time with acting and I look at acting as I'm not so worried about big shows or little. I just want to have fun with it. I just want to have fun with everything I do. And I think my real goal now is to take this next year, and I'd like to write a detailed book on wrestling and my career and my life. I've kept a incredible log of details about my life. I think I loved Mankind's book, but Mankind's book has got nothing to do with what I do for a living. I was never a masochist. I wasn't about getting hurt. I never got paid to get hurt. I was just the opposite of him. I loved his stories, but I think I got more of a history. I go back with Andre. I actually go back to Skylar Lowe and when I was a little kid. And I think if you really want to know about wrestling, I think I could write a book on that.
I want to ask you because obviously there's a situation that exists with the WWF with the death of your brother that obviously has cast a real question over what happened and all of that. But aside from that, given your experiences as a wrestler, and given the fact that you had a terrible falling out with Vince McMahon, but given the fact that you really respect the way he runs things, if you were healthy enough to wrestle, based on your experiences, and I had a contract from WCW and one from WWF, which one would you take?
If I had to?
Yeah.
I'd take the WCW. I think, just based on what happened before, I think integrity is everything, and it's not about money, it's about integrity. And I wake up every day and I look in the mirror and I have integrity, and I think Vince McMahon could be a billionaire, which he is.
I was going to say, and I think that's happened.
He can wake up every morning and I don't know how many, it doesn't matter how many billions of dollars you got, you can't buy integrity, and he has none, you know. But
he knew what he was doing.
He was a genius when it comes to wrestling. I have incredible regard for him on that.
Who's the next Bret Hart?
I mean, I love Chris Benoit and Jericho. Some of the Canadian guys are the best guys. But if I had to exclude anybody that I know now, I don't know. I don't know that it's changed too much. It's changed so much. I don't know what it takes to be a great wrestler anymore.
Bret, I have to cut you off. What a pleasure it is. You've been wonderful to me and wonderful to the show. And you talked about your greatest thrills. For me, having you on the show is the greatest thrill. And I know for every wrestler who ever saw you wrestler, it's the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Michael Landsburg's clothing, courtesy for you.
That there's a lot of guys who are great with the microphone, and then there's a lot of guys who are really good wrestlers, but it's really the rare guy that can do both, right?